Hi, welcome to my channel. Today's demo is going to be using backlighting as a way to render our shapes. Now, if you look at these shapes, these aren't just your normal primitive shapes. You can see right away that these are very round. They've got a lot of compound surfaces. There's going to be some blended forms happening. There's going to be obviously a lot of opportunity for cast shadows. So we're going to learn to take advantage of that and to keep in mind that we've got light coming from the back of our surfaces. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use a very simple technique again, the two marker technique. I like using a cool gray 3 and 5 because this is where I'm going to get the most value without going overboard. And then I'll go ahead and bring our pencil back in to help identify some hard to reach surfaces and shapes. And then we'll come back in and finish off the drawings using our Sharpie pens, our ultra fine and our fine point. Now this thin one here is what I've been using lately. I've been using this ultra fine, okay, and this gives you a really nice fine line quality, and it's made by Staedtler. It's called the Staedtler Tri Plus Fine Liner. I like it. It actually works pretty well with markers and doesn't bleed. Okay, so that's definitely something you want to consider putting in your art box. All right, so let's get started by just kind of pushing away some of these markers and centering ourselves on the page. So I'm going ahead and push these over. I'll set the cool gray 5 over there. I'll keep the pencil nearby because that's going to help me troubleshoot some surfaces, and then we'll get going. All right, so let's go ahead and pull our page forward. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in so we can take a closer look, and let's see where we are at here. I don't want to zoom too much. Okay, here we go. So let's start off with this shape here. This almost looks like a little blobby rocket ship, okay? And the way you like to approach this is always, again, it's a backlight situation. So I've gone ahead and uncapped my broad nib side of the marker. Okay, this will give me the most variety of marker stroke weight. Again, let's kind of review that. You get a broad nib, right? And then if you turn it 90 degrees, you'll get a medium fine line, and then you get an ultra fine line here. See, and all that from one marker nib, and that's why I like using the broad nib, which is the chisel point side. All right, so let's take a look at this. All right, light sources come from here. Okay, so what that tells you is that the highlights are probably going to be all along this back edge here. Okay, all along back in here. There might be some reflected light because again, this is round. It's spherical, right? So there's going to be a little bit of reflected light here. There's kind of probably be some light here catching on the top of the wing, maybe here at the furthest edge here. And we're going to try to follow that all the way through. And you see how my methodology behind rendering this is that I start to kind of create some sort of a perimeter border. And what that does, it helps me kind of separate out the very brightest surfaces, and also kind of helps define the shape as well. And I always take into account the convergence of perspective. So you'll find that a lot of your lines will start to kind of fade off into the edges as it's trying to wrap around itself. Okay. All right. Now, once I've got the edge light and my light source identified, I'll go back in and start to find the core shadow, which is the darkest part, right? It's the darkest part opposite the light. So when I think about how core shadows work, I have to also take into account the particular shapes that it's casting upon. So when I think about this, I'll start to identify that, well, you know, I remember the core shadow being sort of this kind of shape on a spherical form, right? Rather large. And then as it's moving around, because it's not really round, you see how I kind of started looking like it was spherical? Well, that just kind of got me going. And then what I did was I started to think about that. What would happen if that spherical shape stretched and went all the way around? Okay, you see? And what happens when it got to this kind of a curved cone? Okay, and you can see the blending that's happening, right? You see how it's the shapes are starting to blend and transition to a smaller diameter here. Okay, and then what you want to do next is come back in here. This is the underside of this wing, right? So my feeling is it's kind of a bullnose around the edge, but it actually flattens as it comes around the bottom. So I'm not going to kind of go all the way quite as far as I did here, but I will start to taper it back. And I'll do the same thing here. Again, you can see what I did here is I rotated my marker. Okay. And then these are flat sides, so I feel pretty confident in filling that completely. And these are also flat as well, so I'll go ahead and completely fill those. Okay. And remember when we were doing our bean technique? And I'll go ahead and flash that thumbnail up so you can take a look at that. And you remember how we kind of made sure that, you know, that core shadow followed all the way through? Now, and we've done that with this, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back in and strengthen the core, right? You go back in, strengthen the core. And remember what we did with the spherical or round shapes? We scrub, okay? And you see how I'm scrubbing? And then what I'll do is, as I'm reaching the very top of this highlight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of lift the marker up off the page, okay? You know, it's almost like a stippling motion. And you see how that kind of creates a bit of a gradient here? But the thing to remember, the tip to this technique is you need to come back in before you do the scrubbing and the stippling. You got to come in here and strengthen the core one more time, because what that does is it makes this a little bit darker and allows this layer of value to have a more natural transition. And you see when we scrubbed, you can see what happened with that little mistake that we did a little earlier when we went a little too far. It kind of got blended in. So this is also a great technique to not worry so much about making little mistakes along the way. You know you're going to come back in and you're going to add a little more value, and it's going to kind of make everything go away. All right. So that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and scrub down here up against this core and make the core a little darker, right, to make that turn. And then what we're going to do here is go over this surface one more time, right, because it's furthest from the light, so it's actually going to get a little more of a cast shadow. All right, and this is also going to get a little bit of value, but don't go all the way, because you remember you're going to get reflected light coming back this way. Okay. All right. That looks pretty good. You see how easy that was? You start off first with the shadows, and then you come back in with the scrub or the second value. But don't forget to come back in and strengthen your core shadows before you do that, because you want those to stand out. And you have to practice restraint by allowing the highlights to be visible. All right, so don't color that in. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come back in and strengthen the line work around the object to make that pop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in with my ultra fine point Sharpie. And again, I love Sharpies because, number one, they're relatively inexpensive. Number two, they're super easy to find. You can buy 12 packs. You can buy them at the supermarket, or you can order them. And there we go. Okay, and I try to not get really back in too much from the line work here, because the drawing itself already has a little bit of definition. All right. Now, what can you also do once you're at this point of the design? You can always consider adding detail, right? So let's say you want to put some landing gear. You can start at the center line. You can come underneath, follow the contours. That can be like a couple of doors that would open up, right? Add some landing lights. You see? And what's really great about this technique is that it allows for you to see the contours. It allows you to make some good judgment calls with regards to how would that line look as it was coming around that compound curve, right? It wouldn't be a straight, even basically an even ellipse. It would have a bit of convergence as it's moving away from the picture plane, or moving away from your station point. Okay, so there you have it. Okay, so that's a really great technique for drawing these, and you can apply that technique to all of these shapes, and all really depends on your light source, taking your time, identifying what's happening, and away you go. All right. So there we have it. Let me zoom back out so you guys can take a look at the entire page. Okay. All right. See you at the next video.